we're now going to hear from Dr. Chris Burke. Chris is a chartered clinical psychologist who specializes in developmental trauma. He acts as an expert witness in child and family law. He developed the Safe and Meaningful Contact Guidelines, which are going to be the subject of his talk, to identify whether the contact system is being appropriately supported to achieve safe and meaningful direct contact for children. Chris also provides training, consultation, and supervision to legal decision makers and practitioners working with looked after children and caregivers to help develop understanding of psychological needs of traumatized children. So it'll be really interesting to hear from you. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen, very much, and thanks very much for having me along to present today. I'm just not sure if you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Yep. You can?
Yep, sure.
Oh, great. Okay. On my screen, I can still see Julie's for some reason, and thanks to Julie as well, because certainly she sets me up really nicely for my talk, as she said. So just to introduce myself, well, I've been introduced, but yeah, just to reiterate, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm talking today about a framework that I developed to aid contact decision making, to highlight what needs to be considered from a child's perspective to ensure that contact is serving the best interests of the child. And today I've trained approximately 1,000 social workers to use this framework. And it stemmed from my work predominantly as an expert witness, in which I've kind of used the University of East Anglia research, Julie's research and Beth Neal's research, and written reports where I'm trying to explain the child's needs and the research evidence base behind that, and sometimes felt frustrated that the psychological well-being of the child and the needs weren't always at the center of decision making. So that's how these guidelines evolved, really, from my experience in the court setting as an expert witness. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is by briefly highlighting the psychological factors central to the child's needs. I feel like I'm like a YouTube where you've put me on 1.5 speed because I'm going to speak quickly. So hopefully you can take me in as I plow through these slides. Yeah, so what I want to do is show what safe and meaningful contact looks like, make links between the child's developmental needs and contact arrangements, and just talk about how the SAMHSA guidelines can support cultural change. Okay, so the main aim of the Safe and Meaningful Contact Framework is to scaffold practitioners to use an evidence-based systemic attachment and trauma-informed approach to making contact recommendations. And this organises contact decision-making around the unique needs of a child separated from their birth family. And essentially, these are the main things that I hope the outcome will be of using the tool. So they highlight that contact recommendations must demonstrate how contact benefits the child's developmental progress by helping the child establish safe relationships and overcome past setbacks. So we're kind of reframing contact as a resource that can play a part in the child's developmental progress and recovery. And to achieve developmental progress, contact requires appropriate support for the child, but also for their carer or adopter, and for the birth family member as well. And that can be any from the birth parent, siblings, extended family. Another core underpinning is that quality of contact is more meaningful than quantity. So, for example, a high frequency of poor quality contact may be damaging to the child's ongoing development, but a low frequency of carefully managed contact might be beneficial to the child. When thinking about risk, contact is a risk to the child's development when it undermines their sense of safety with their carer or adopter. So I really want to just emphasize in the talk today, I really emphasize the importance of the child's recovery journey, if you like, is centered around their relationship with their new carer and their safety within that context. And contact can potentially play a role in helping that. But one identifier of risk, or a main identifier of risk, is when it potentially undermines that safe relationship and the child's need to establish that safety and stability. And finally, just that contact's not fluid. It is fluid, it's not static, and it requires regular review. Because the child, the carer, the birth relative, they're all going to change over time. So contact plans can very quickly actually become outdated, and we can be stuck with them for years, and it's really unhelpful. Okay, so these factors are important because establishing safety and stability within their placement with the carer or adopter is really central to the child's recovery from their destabilizing past experiences. So this can be both harming the care of birth parents and multiple separations, post-separation from the birth parent in terms of multiple carers, short-term care placements within the care system before reaching, hopefully, a consistent and stable base. So I'm going to briefly explain the general needs of the child in care before highlighting the role contact can play in addressing these needs. And really, unfortunately, I suppose research informs that the harmful patterns of early relationships do become hardwired in the child's developing brain. So therefore, care relationships become associated with neglect, with abuse, physical and or sexual, and separation, loss and rejection. And of course, not all of children's time with birth parents or in care is negative. So for example, a mother may be able to offer their child more positive care when not impacted by a partner's abuse. So the child may have some internalized protective experiences, but generally due to a lack of consistency, their experience of care relationships is one of confusion, a lack of safety, and a mistrust of caregivers. So trauma is really relational, and the recovery needs to be in the context of relationships. So of course, then we place the child with a safe new carer or adopter, and they're obviously trying to offer the child the love and nurturance that they need to help create healthy neurological connections. But they need to be mindful that these positive experiences are competing with the child's pre-existing hardwired representations of past relationships. So if you like, they're the ghosts of the child's past, and they are an internalized part of the child. So the child, again, they mistrust healthy caregiving relationships. And research shows us that it's not possible to wipe out or remove memory traces of early negative experiences. Indeed, neurobiology indicates that traces of early traumatic experiences will remain indefinitely in the primitive structures of the brain. But it's not all bad news. I will try and explain why that can be, how we can help. So when the carer does offer the child the appropriate love, affection, and nurturance that they need, the child might expect harm or rejection. And so they seek to protect themselves through behaviors that might appear challenging. We sometimes label them as challenging behaviors, such as withdrawal, self-harm, or acting out. But they're in fact survival, fight, flight, freeze behaviors. They're trying to survive in a world that they feel they can't trust. So really, love and affection's not enough. And if the carer doesn't understand the child's needs or avoids addressing the child's history, the risk is the child will overwhelm the caregiver. And I think Julie mentioned, children feeling alone. And if you're afraid and alone, that's what defines trauma. And the danger is if we don't address the child's past, this is leaving the child, basically reinforcing the child's trauma. And that's when we risk placement breakdown. And of course, the child's struggles then impact as well on the wider system in terms of neighbourhood, school, eventually might become part of the legal system themselves. So we really need to be supporting carers and adopters to understand the reality of the needs of their child. And a more integrated, emotionally containing approach to managing the child's needs can hopefully improve outcomes. So when the carer offers the child love and affection and the child goes into the survival mode, the carer's role is to help the child manage and regulate those unbearable feelings. And this is done through reflecting upon the child's experience and through understanding, tolerating, and acknowledging the child's fear and their feelings of loss, feelings of rejection, their feelings of confusion. So the carer must recognize that however limited the birth parent's parenting was, the child has an attachment drive to be with them. So the child needs help to understand what has happened to them, including why they're not with their birth family. And all the research will show that open communication about birth family will help the child to feel understood and safer with their carer. So over time, through this therapeutic parenting process, the child internalizes the healthy care that they receive, and they learn that difficult feelings can be thought about and managed. And this helps the child to understand themselves and their emotions, which then allows them to regulate their own feelings, which is what progresses them towards a more healthy developmental trajectory. So that kind of middle circle, it's an oversimplification, but it's kind of the green and the red alongside each other, and the red has less those kind of hardwired neurological expectations of relationships can now be managed because they have internalized a safer relationship and they've understood where those kind of red parts have originated and come from. So they're better
5
able
minutes, please. Sorry, Chris. I'm afraid we're hitting the barrier.
No problem.
Thanks.
Okay, so what does the child need to recover from their past? Essentially, they need to establish a safe and stable relationship. They need to make sense of their feelings of distress, separation, loss, and rejection. They need to form a coherent sense of themselves and a clear identity to make sense of why they need to be looked after. And they also might need to process any specifically traumatic events that they may be stuck with. So these are their main needs, and this is what's all built into the Safe and Meaningful Contact framework. And that basically reframes, as I said, contact as a potential resource in the child's developmental recovery. So when practitioners are using the guidelines, what they're essentially doing is asking, to what extent can contact promote placement stability? To what extent can it help the child manage loss and separation? Help the child to understand who they are, where they come from, why they don't live with their birth parents anymore, and whether it can help them to overcome or process particularly traumatic past experiences. And of course, to do that, we need to support the whole system. We need to get everyone on board. We need to help carers understand the importance of the contact. We need to help birth relatives understand their importance to the process for the child and their ongoing relationship being so meaningful to the child. And we need to regulate the child in order to help them to feel safe within the context. And there is an evidence base underpinning all this. So the IA paper, well-supported, good quality contact can contribute to children and young people's sense of identity, mitigate issues around attachment, and help children to find a sense of closure and understanding of the reasons for their placement. Okay, so just very briefly, why were they developed? I suppose I've started to explain that, but really it is to operationalize this evidence base. It is now making traction, and but it's such an excellent evidence base. And as I said, initially, I was quite frustrated within the system that it wasn't being thought about, the child's needs were being lost. But also to give practitioners a toolkit that scaffolds them to evidence their recommendations around the developmental needs of the child. And through a consistent, a universal tool, if everyone is using a framework such as this, then there's a shared language that they can have. This is the framework that can help them to share their thinking. Have you completed the SAMT guidelines? And that can be a way of sharing. And it's not just a post-adoption tool. It's for at any stage of the child's journey in the care system. So it could be short-term or long-term foster care, kinship care, even residential care. And of course, sometimes that journey then changes to adoption. And obviously, if the tool can be used throughout that journey, it can be kind of reviewed and see what's best for the child. Highlights the need for appropriate support, because without that, potentially really positive contact might become dysregulating just because it's poorly supported, and to highlight the risks associated with no or with too much contact. Just very finally, this is really just something you already know, but just in terms of what are the drivers of change? Well, there is the excellent evidence base out there. We better understand dual identity needs of adults who want to come back and meet their birth family if they haven't met them. We know that this is something that doesn't go away. The Public Law Working Group, as we've talked about, modernising adoption, culture change around maintaining relationships, Adopt England of pushing. The Safe and Meaningful Contact Guidelines is kind of a Scottish, I'm based up in Scotland, contribution, trying to keep the child's needs at the centre. And of course, the Adoption Forum, trying to make a difference. That's just about me. Thank you.